Hey everybody, a few weeks ago my son and I went off-roading and we had a fantastic time. It was really a lot of fun. Unfortunately, the truck didn't fare quite so well. There was one little section of the trail at the bottom of a very tight ravine. We had to do a very tight turn and the back of this bumper wound up getting to know the wall of the ravine a little too well. As a result, I've got some scuffs and scratches down here. Now this bumper is steel, so that's going to rust. I can't leave it like that, so in this video I'm going to show you how easy and inexpensive it can be to fix a problem like this yourself. Before I get started, I want to talk about whether the bumper has to come off the truck, and the answer is no. This repair is located right here in this lower corner. I can totally do the entire thing without taking the bumper off the truck. However, I can't film it very well with the bumper where it is, and I'd like to show you a lot of detail about what I'm doing and how to do it. So I am going to take the bumper off the truck only because that makes it a lot easier to film. So let me get the bumper pulled off and I'll meet you at the workbench. That's better. Pulling this bumper is really pretty easy if you do decide that you want to have the extra access and the convenience of being able to work standing up rather than laying down. On this particular model, it's just 6 bolts along the bottom and 1 wiring harness. It took me less than 5 minutes to get it pulled. But now that it's up here, let's zoom in on this little area and see what we need to do to get it fixed. Here we can see a really nice clean view of the damaged area. As you can see, there's lots of scratches and scuffs and nicks, and then right here it's down to the bare metal. That's where it's going to rust if I just leave it. So fixing this might seem really intimidating, but it's really not too bad at all. I'll wind up just sanding the entire area smooth, and then we'll apply primer, paint, and clear coat. There's a few other tips and tricks I'll show you along the way to save you some time and to make this whole process a lot easier. One of those first tips I'm going to show you has to do with these little parking sensors. If your bumper has these in them, the best thing you can do before you try and paint anything is just pull these guys out, because you don't want to paint over these. It can affect how well they work. Removing it is pretty simple. There's just a small wiring harness to remove on the back, and then depress the clips that are holding it into its mounting hole, and it comes right out. With this sensor removed, we're ready to start sanding. I'm going to start with 150 grit and then move my way up through finer and finer grits until this entire area is nice and smooth and ready for primer. The eagle-eyed among you might have noticed there's a little drip right here in the clear coat. That's not from the factory. This truck was actually rear-ended last year, and this bumper has already been repainted once by a professional body shop, and they left a big old drip in the clear coat. We'll take care of that while we're at it. Now, I am going to be using this random orbital sander. If you don't have one of these, you can totally just do this by hand. It's not that big of a deal. You just get right in there and start sanding. Now, the random orbital is going to make things go a little bit faster for me, but I just want to make sure it's clear. You don't have to have this tool to be able to do this repair. Nobody likes to sand or even to watch me do it, so we'll skip ahead a bit through this process. All right, I've gotten all the scratches out that were put there by the side of that ravine. Now we've just got the scratches from the 150 grit sandpaper, so I'm moving up to 180, and I'm going to be switching to doing the rest of this by hand. While that power sander is super convenient for getting things done quickly, it's also a little bit too large for this area to be able to really be careful with where I'm going, so I'm just going to do the rest by hand. Now we're moving up to 220. And next we're doing 320. Next we're going to go to 400. And then finally I'm going to go as high as 600. Okay, that's looking pretty good. Next, I've got a damp paper towel here. I'm just going to run this over the surface. That'll pick up a lot of that dust and leftover sanding deposits, and we'll just make sure things are looking good. I'm looking for areas of deeper scratches that I missed with the sandpaper, and I can see a few in some areas. We'll address those in just a minute. Now that I've got it more or less sort of prepped, now it's time to start masking off these plastic parts that I want to make sure we don't paint. The key to getting a great looking result is all in the prep work. Sanding and masking, as well as correct surface prep, will make or break a paint job, so it's worth it to take your time on these steps and to do them properly. As I'm masking off this plastic, I've loosened a few of the fasteners that hold the plastic cap on the bumper so that I can slide the masking tape into the joint and then fold it over the outside of the plastic rim. This will make sure I don't get any paint on the underside of the plastic. In the really tight areas, I'm using a very small pick to help push the tape down into the joint. Once I finish this first layer, I'll throw another layer on top just to help make sure everything stays in place and to provide a nice even surface for the next step. When masking, I always start right at the edge of where I'm going to be painting and work my way out. And now that I've finished that first edge, I'm using an old plastic tablecloth to cover up the majority of the rest of the bumper. You don't have to have fancy and expensive masking materials. Anything that will block the overspray will do nicely. Now this old plastic tablecloth is intended for a round table, and the shape would not cover all of the rest of the bumper. So I found an old shopping bag from the hardware store to finish off the last part, and this worked perfectly. Make sure your masking material overlaps the tape you've already put down, and also make sure that you don't leave any gaps in the tape because the paint spray can lift the edges and sneak under the masking of any gaps. So just make sure there's a good seal there. Now that I've masked off the entire area, the next thing is I'm going to go through and look for any little fine scratches that are left. This is a pretty good view of one area that needs a little bit of extra sanding. I'm just going to use my 600 grit and I'm going to go through very carefully just in little tiny spots like this that need a little bit of extra attention. After I've done a little bit of sanding, I'll wipe it down with a wet towel and then with a dry. And once the surface is dried really well, we can see if there's any scratches left. This is looking much, much better. All right, now that we're done with the sanding, it's time to protect this bare metal. And I'm going to start with a primer. I picked this up at the local auto parts store. It's not sponsored at all. Nothing in this video is. I paid for everything you're going to see with my own money. But this is a filler primer. And what that's going to do is fill in a lot of these scratches and be very easy to sand. Oh, and also real quick, before I spray any sort of aerosol, I like my lungs. I want to keep them working. I'm going to wear a respirator, and so should you. Notice that I'm starting with a very light coat at first. I wound up doing 4 coats of primer, focusing on the bare metal area at first, and then gradually widening out the coverage with later coats. Don't go too heavy on any single coat. It's always better and easier to build up multiple thinner layers than to deal with runs and drips from rushing and putting on coats that are too heavy. Also, follow the instructions in the can. If it says to wait 10 minutes between coats, don't assume 5 or even 7 is enough. Wait the full 10. After 4 coats, I was happy with the level of coverage and was ready for everybody's favorite step, more sanding. All right, I followed the instructions for the primer and let it dry for at least a half an hour. Now I'm going to come back with some 600 grit sandpaper and just smooth this all off. When sanding primer, use a very light touch. It's incredibly easy to sand too hard and to go right through the primer. I managed to be very careful and didn't sand through the primer, but if you accidentally do, all you need to do is back up a step, add more primer, and then sand again. After a little bit of sanding, we're going to come back with a damp rag, pick up all that dust, see what might be left that needs a little bit more sanding. Once I was satisfied the primer was smooth everywhere, I lightly scuffed the remaining exposed portions of the bumper with 600 grit sandpaper so that the paint would adhere better. Once I've got it to the point where I feel like it's probably as smooth as it needs to be everywhere, I'm checking it with my fingertips. Your fingertips are extremely sensitive, and you'll be able to feel any areas that are maybe not quite as smooth as they need to be, where you might need to come back and hit it with just a little bit more sandpaper. But this feels really good to me. All right, up until now, I haven't been too concerned with all of the junk floating around in the air, all the dust all over the table and on the floor, as what I've been doing so far is all stuff that's going to be covered up soon with paint and clear coat. But now is about when I need to start worrying about that sort of stuff, because I don't want all of that dust in the air to settle down on my paint or the clear coat once I get that laid down. So I'm going to clean the table with a wet rag. I'm going to spray down my floor a little bit with some water. That's all just going to help cut down on the amount of dust. And then to make sure the panel is perfectly clean, I'm going to blow it off with some air. And then I'm going to use a solvent-based prep solution. It's called Prep-All. And this stuff is great for removing any grease or oils or dirt and stuff that's left over on the panel, and it makes it perfectly ready to accept your paint. All right, I'm finally ready to put some paint on this bumper. So let's talk just briefly about the paint I'll be using, where I got it, how much I spent on it, how I know it's the right color, all those kinds of things. If you open the driver's door of your car, you should find a sticker on there that's got a paint code listed. This will be a manufacturer-specific paint code that any paint shop can look up the exact formulation of the paint that was used at the factory, and they can give you exactly the same paint, and so it will be a perfect factory match. Now in my particular case, I've got one extra step to go through, and that is because the paint code is for the body of my truck, which happens to be blue, not this silver color. And that's because my truck came with what's called a Sport Appearance Package. It's an option from Ford, and they paint things a different color on the bumper, some trim pieces, that sort of thing. So I had to go and look up with Ford, what is the Sport Appearance Package paint code for those accessories? And the answer is J7. That's the paint code. It's called Magnetic Metallic. And so I just jumped into Google and said, give me a can of J7 Magnetic Metallic. And the first result was this place, R&E Paint Supply. And they sent me this can that is called Ford J7 Magnetic Metallic 11 ounces. And again, this is not sponsored or anything. I just ordered the paint that I needed. And to be completely transparent about how much it all cost, they sent me the can of paint for $21.95. And I had to pick up a can of clear coat for an additional $17.50. So all in, a little bit less than 40 bucks for the paint and clear coat I'm going to need to perfectly match the paint color on this bumper. Included in the package with the paint and the clear coat was a nice set of instructions that's going to help make sure that I get a really good result. And they also include a spray out test card like this. Now this card is white, then it has a glossy side and a matte side. The idea is to spray out a little bit of the paint onto the glossy side, give it 2 or 3 coats, make sure you get really good coverage, give it a chance to dry properly, and then go take it out to the vehicle and hold it up against any other part of the vehicle that's painted that color and make sure that it's a good match. Now this being a metallic paint, it's a little hard to see with all the glare and reflections and all of that with the camera, but in person with my eye I can tell this is a perfect match. Having verified the paint is a good match, I'm finally ready to start painting. The first coat should be very light, just barely more than a dusting. To do this, hold the can about 10 inches or so away from the part and move it back and forth in gentle sweeping motions. Make sure you crisscross your strokes to avoid developing patterns in the paint. Push the button to start the spray while you're pointing away from the part, and then sweep the can over the part, stopping once you've passed the end. Check the instructions on the can and wait the full recommended time between coats. Subsequent coats can be put on a little bit heavier, but no coat should ever be very heavy. That's how you wind up with runs in the paint. I can't stress enough how important it is to not be in a rush at this step. Several light coats with proper dry time will always produce a better result than just a couple of heavier coats. I forgot to film it, but I did open a door for a little bit of extra airflow. For a small part like this, that's probably all you need to do. If you're painting a larger panel, you probably also should set up a fan to exhaust some of the extra fumes. And it bears repeating, follow the instructions for dry times carefully. This paint says it needs to dry for at least 10 minutes between coats. I always just set a timer on my watch and go do something else while I wait for that time. After the final coat, the instructions say to wait at least an hour, but no longer than 16 hours before applying the clear coat. Now the clear coat that I'll be using, again, is from that same place where I ordered the paint, and it is a 2K clear coat, which means there's an activator that I have to activate inside the can. I've used a couple of different kinds of these before. Some have a thing you have to push really hard, some have a thing you have to twist. Read the instructions on the back of the can for your clear coat and make sure that you have activated it properly before you attempt to apply it to your paint. This one comes with a little ring that you have to put through this lug, then you pull down like that, and then twist it 360 degrees. 180, 360. And I felt it make a little noise inside the can there. I think we can push that back in. We can probably take this ring back off now. And now we need to shake up this can to make sure that activator is mixed in. Curing paint can peel up tape, so double check your masking. I just saw a little spot that sort of peeled up with the paint. So we'll just tape that back down. One last quick note about 2K clear like this. Once you activate it, you've only got a few hours worth of working time for this can. You can't just use a little bit, put it on your shelf, expect to come back to it months later for another job. Once it's activated, you have to use the whole can or throw out what's left. It had been a few hours since I last wet down the floor, and as I really didn't want any dust to land on my clear coat, I wet it down once more. Again, don't forget your PPE. Just like with paint, several thin coats is always going to be better than just a couple of thick coats. I started with a very light initial coat, and then after letting that dry, I put on 3 more medium-ish coats, and I couldn't be happier with the results. It really did turn out great.
I was only planning to do 3 coats of this clear, but there's a little bit left, so 4. Hopefully you can hear me well enough. I just finished the final coat of clear. I had enough to do 4 good coats on this bumper, and I'm going to leave this overnight, so we'll pick this up tomorrow morning for the next steps.
All right, this has been curing overnight. I think it looks fantastic. It's time to pull off all this masking, so let me get you in nice and close and you can see how things turned out. Removing the masking is possibly the most satisfying part of any paint job. As long as you've let things cure properly, you don't need to be very careful here. Just pull off the masking material and the tape. Now be careful around this fresh paint if you have to use anything sharp to dig some tape out of a crack. Remember, this paint is fresh, and while it's dry to the touch, it is still fairly soft. I had this small section where I needed to use a small metal pick to get some of the tape out, and I was very careful to make sure I did not let the pick touch the freshly painted surface. And here we are, fresh out of the masking, and these results are fantastic. With the masking all removed, now I'm ready to reassemble the bumper by pushing the cap back into its clips and reinstalling the parking proximity sensor. That sensor just clips into place, and don't forget to reattach the wiring harness. I gave the whole bumper a final wipe down to remove any leftover dust from the sanding, and then it was ready to reinstall on the truck. Whenever you're putting something structural like a bumper back onto a vehicle, always make sure you torque it to the correct specifications. The instructions for the clear coat say I need to let this cure for at least 24 hours before I do any other final finishing work like wet sanding to remove any dust nibs or polishing the surface. But I'm so pleased with how this turned out, I don't think I'll need to do any extra finishing work at all. There's very little orange peel texture, and it perfectly matches the finish of the rest of the truck. Plus, it's a bumper on a truck that I take off-road a fair bit, and so there's pretty good odds that I'll be back here again someday to do a similar repair. Hopefully you can see that taking care of a small blemish on paint like this is not that difficult to do. You can do it yourself over a weekend. The cost is really minimal. I only spent about $50. That was for the color, the clear coat, and the primer all together. And then I just used stuff I already had on hand. I already had some sandpaper. I used an old plastic tablecloth for the masking, a bag from the grocery store, a roll of tape I already had. And yeah, sure, I did have a couple of tools that made it a little easier to take the bumper off the truck, which made it a little bit easier of a job, but you could totally have done this with the bumper on the truck still. You don't need to have any specialty tools or anything. This is a very approachable project. If you've got a little blemish on your paint, I'll bet you can take care of it as well. If you've enjoyed this video or learned a little something, you can let me know with a thumbs up down below. If you've got a suggestion or comment for something I can do better or differently, I'd love to hear about that down in the comments section. And if you'd like to see more content like this, you can always think about subscribing, but there's never any pressure from me, of course. And as always, thank you very much for watching. But make sure you're wearing something that's better than just a dust mask. You don't want all of the chemicals that are in this to go into you. It's not good. Get creative, and you can find that it doesn't take all that much to get something like this to go. There's an engine. We're going to try that again. Lungs, if you're ever going to spray anything like this, I'll put links in the description. You know the deal. Thank you very much for watching. Where's that fly? The fly keeps buzzing around my head. Ah, there it is again. Ah. And wearing some protection for your lungs. You only got one set. And if they don't work very well, life's harder.